Tonight on Quest, giant sequoias can live for 1,000 years and grow taller than a 30-story building. But the drought is taking a toll on these iconic California trees. Now scientists are scrambling to figure out how to save them. And the Hayward Fault may be the most dangerous earthquake fault in America. Is the Bay Area ready for the next really big one? And find out how chefs are using chemistry to expand the world of flavor.
Support for Quest is provided by the National Science Foundation, the S.D. Bechtel Jr. Foundation, Hope Lab, the David B. Gold Foundation, the Dirk and Charlene Kabsanel Foundation, the Vadez Family Foundation, the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, and the Smart Family Foundation. Support is also provided by the members of KQED. Quest is a project of KQED Science.
It's 3:30 in the morning in a parking lot in California's Sequoia National Park. Two University of California, Berkeley researchers walk a half hour into the forest.
Hi, tree.
They'll each climb 3 giant sequoias by sunrise. Anthony Ambrose is climbing this giant sequoia to find out how it's faring after 4 years of drought.
We are at about 240 feet at the top of a giant sequoia tree.
These leaves will tell him how stressed out the tree is by the lack of water.
You need to measure them kind of at the most relaxed time of the day, before the sun rises, before they start to lose water to the atmosphere. So we kind of get their baseline, kind of most relaxed state, and then their most active state in the middle of the day.
At noon, Ambrose's colleague Wendy Baxter makes her way up another giant sequoia.
Giant sequoias are just such special trees. They've been able to persist and live in this exact place, maybe for thousands of years. Some of them live to be 3,000 years old.
Over the course of their long lives, they can grow as tall as a 30-story building.
There's a beautiful view up here.
Even at these great heights, they're able to get water to leaves at their treetops.
There is higher concentrations of water in the soil than in the air, so that gradient is actually pulling the water up through the tree.
Inside each of the tree's cells, water gets pulled up to the top of the tree as if it were being sucked up through a straw. Researchers can determine how much tension the water is under as it travels upward and into each leaf.
When we clip it, the water retracts back into the stem, kind of like a rubber band.
Then, researcher Ken Schwab places the leaves in a pressure chamber.
And when we put our stem into the pressure chamber, the amount of pressure that it takes to force the water back out is an indication of how much tension it was under.
I'm beginning to see darkening in water.
The higher the pressure required to push the water out, the more stressed the tree is.
The trees are definitely as stressed as we've ever measured giant sequoia. We've been measuring giant sequoia water status periodically over the last few decades under non-drought conditions, and most of the trees seem to be kind of at that level or exceeding it. They require an enormous amount of water, way more than any other tree that's ever been documented. So Nate.
But biologist Nathan Stevenson says that little water has been available to the trees. That's because giant sequoias get most of their water from snow.
So the last 2 winters here have been by far the warmest on record, and what that's meant is there's been almost no snow on the ground.
All this yellow here wasn't there when we rigged it just a few weeks ago.
In the summer of 2014, Stevenson noticed something new.
I looked up and I saw a big, mature giant sequoia, and its foliage was turning brown. At least half of its foliage had gone brown. No one has ever reported that before.
Only a handful of the park's sequoias have perished during the drought. But according to the U.S. Forest Service, more than 6 million trees of other species in the Sierra Nevada mountain range have died.
We're seeing firs, pines, incense cedars, and oaks are all dying at a rate we've never seen before. Even during the 1977 drought in California, we didn't see this many trees dying.
Trees move water from soil to the atmosphere, which helps create rain and snow. When little water is available, the pull of the dry atmosphere creates so much tension that it breaks the water column. Gas that was present in the water forms bubbles, which prevent water from moving up to the treetops. If bubbles stop water flow in cell after cell, the tree dies. Over time, tree deaths can reduce precipitation and cause the land to dry even more. Giant sequoias are resilient trees, and for now, most of them are weathering the drought, says Sequoia National Park's Corin Neidick.
A lot of our sequoias are still appearing healthy, still doing well during the drought, but there are some that are showing symptoms, and we want to learn more about that and be able to track that stress.
Researchers can only climb a fraction of the area's estimated 160,000 giant sequoias. So the park has also enlisted scientists who can survey many giant sequoias at the same time. The Carnegie Airborne Observatory measures the tree's water content. The blue trees are getting the most water. The yellow, orange, and red trees are getting the least. The park has a plan to help the most vulnerable giant sequoias. One strategy, which might seem counterintuitive, is to burn part of the forest. Because giant sequoias are resistant to fire, they stand to gain.
There's less competition for the larger trees that remain behind, so the larger trees have more access to water, nutrients, and helps them get through the drought.
And if symptoms got more severe, the park might consider watering its most famous giant sequoias, including the General Sherman, billed as the largest tree in the world. The National Park Service doesn't currently water any plants, choosing instead to let nature take its course. But that could change.
Looking to the future, if humans continue to warm the climate by adding greenhouse gases to it, we might have to consider some unnatural actions.
With snowpacks disappearing, the park may be forced into a more active role, one that could include drip irrigation for the General Sherman and the other famous trees.
Most people in the Bay Area know about the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake. And they know about the 1906 earthquake and fire. But the 1868 earthquake was so long ago, and so our memory of that has really faded over time.
On the morning of the 21st of October, in the year 1868, happened one of the most terrifying calamities that has ever visited the coast of California. At 7 minutes to 8 o'clock, a violent trembling and shaking of the earth occurred.
They called it the Great San Francisco Earthquake, but it predated the 1906 quake by more than 30 years. The earthquake of 1868 was absolutely devastating.
Let us fervently hope that we have seen and felt the last of this earthquake. Charles E. Miller, October 24th, 1868.
When the shaking stopped, which was estimated at a magnitude 7.0, 30 people were dead and hundreds of buildings were wrecked. The strongest shaking was in the East Bay towns of Hayward, San Leandro, and Fremont. Luckily, these were sparsely populated areas at the time.
In 1868, the entire population of the East Bay was about 24,000 people. About half of those people lived in Oakland. Cities like San Leandro, Hayward had about 500 people. But now, of course, we have over 2.5 million people that live within a stone's throw of the Hayward Fault.
A lesser-known cousin of the San Andreas Fault, the Hayward Fault is a crack in the Earth's crust up to 20 miles deep that stretches roughly 40 miles from San Pablo Bay in the north to Fremont and Milpitas at its southernmost end.
It is constantly moving, little amounts every year. The problem is it's not moving enough. And so we still have big earthquakes on the Hayward Fault to make up the difference.
The Hayward Fault, like the San Andreas, sits atop the boundaries between the North American and Pacific plates, sheets of the Earth's surface which are constantly grinding past each other. Over time, some underground areas along the fault lock, increasing tension. Eventually, when the stresses become too great, the fault slips, releasing energy in the form of underground seismic waves. Those waves produce the shaking we experience as an earthquake.
I'm walking along the Hayward Fault, and here is the offset caused by the fault on this curb.
Jim Leenkemper is a geophysicist with the U.S. Geological Survey in Menlo Park. His specialty is paleoseismology, which means that he studies ancient earthquake ruptures. Leenkemper and others on the USGS team dig trenches across earthquake faults. Peering into tectonic time, they find evidence of fossil earthquakes which they radiocarbon date to determine the magnitudes and dates.
It's only in this deep trench that we're able to get back older in time. So 2,000 years ago, we're looking right around here at the time of the Romans.
Along the Hayward Fault, we have dug one trench very close to the Fremont BART stop. At that site, we have evidence for 12 earthquakes in a single trench.
The most interesting thing we have found is the rate of earthquakes has been fairly regular over the last 2,000 years.
Not only is it regular, it's due. Their data have shown that a major quake on the Hayward Fault has occurred roughly every 140 years for the last 2,000 years. The 140-year deadline came and went in 2008. So now we're officially overdue for another big one. A USGS study in 2015 concluded there is a 72% probability that a magnitude 6.7 or larger earthquake will occur in the next 30 years on one of the Bay Area's 7 faults. So, it's not a question of if, it's a question of when.
Probably the most dangerous fault in the United States is the Hayward Fault right here in the Bay Area, and that's because it has the potential for very large earthquakes, and it runs right through a very built-up area.
And when it goes off, the lives of 7 million people who live and work in the Bay Area will change in a matter of seconds.
Roadways will be shut down. The soft, sandy deposits along the margin of the bay where we have airports, approaches to bridges, they're likely to liquefy, ripping apart the roads. So I think we can assume transportation networks will be completely disrupted and destroyed. Water will likely be shut down. There will be fires because gas lines will rupture. There won't be enough water to fight the fires. Power will be down.
And if that's not enough to get your attention, recent findings by the USGS indicate that a rupture on the Hayward Fault could continue on to the Calaveras Fault, which runs east of downtown San Jose.
The maximum earthquake we could have if the entire Hayward Fault ruptured is about magnitude 7.1. But then if you add an earthquake that would continue on to the Calaveras Fault, you could get a substantially larger earthquake, maybe about 7.4, which would have devastating impact across the region.
To put that in perspective, the total economic damage after Hurricane Katrina was about $125 billion. Scientists are projecting more than $170 billion worth of damage from a magnitude 7 event on the Hayward Fault. And after the Earth stops shaking, at least 200,000 people will be left homeless.
I often say it'd be a lot like Katrina, but here we'd be speaking 150 languages as well.
These old houses were built by Norwegians, by Spanish, by different Europeans, and they're all done differently.
Howard Cook, owner of Bay Area Retrofit, is trying to avert at least some of the impending devastation by preaching the benefits of strengthening your home.
Probably 25% of the houses in the East Bay have been retrofitted, and I would guess that 95% have been done incorrectly. There are no seismic retrofit codes that work. There are some guidelines, but they don't apply to any of the houses we see.
In 2008, a massive 7.9 earthquake struck Sichuan province in China. At least 70,000 people were killed, and 5 million more were left homeless when 80% of the buildings in the region nearest the fault were destroyed. Although most of the structures in the Bay Area have significantly more integrity than those in rural China, the damage caused by a moderate to large earthquake on the Hayward Fault would still be devastating to the built environment. That's why engineers at UC Berkeley's Pacific Earthquake Engineering Research Center in Richmond have been testing buildings on their 20 by 20 foot shake table for decades.
The unique thing about the UC Berkeley shake table is it's a 3-axis shake table. So it can be moved in 3 directions, not only translation, but also rotation.
As a structural engineer at the lab, Khalid Musallam has been involved with shaking up a wide range of structures, like brick walls, wooden buildings, and steel bridge piers.
Most of the tests that we have done on the shaking table have led to improvement in the design. Whether it's improvement in the design of components of a building, improvement of the design of entire structure by understanding how they behave, and more importantly, improvement in the retrofit of the existing built environment.
Scientists are understanding more and more about the Bay Area's seismic quirks and how to build structures that can cope with them. So for Tom Broker, the next step is getting the word out.
Well, you know, preparing for an earthquake is really everyone's job. We can have a kit so that we can survive for 3 days after an earthquake. Government needs to do their job. They need to be prepared so they can respond to the earthquake. How quickly we recover from the earthquake is really determined by how well we've planned in advance for the earthquake and how well we've prepared for it.
Our passion for enhancing the flavor of our food dates back thousands of years. It sent explorers on distant voyages and built empires around the globe. This desire for the sensual is an integral part of being human. We enrich everyday life with our senses, with music and art, and with food that is not just sustaining, but delicious and memorable.
You can strip away all the microplaners and fancy equipment and everything else, but your senses are the most important tools.
Understanding how the senses work and their relationship in perceiving flavor is a puzzle that inspires chefs and intrigues scientists. Until recently, sensory science was a little studied field, but now even cooking schools are teaching flavor physiology. Understanding the elements of flavor allows chefs and scientists to more accurately identify our likes and dislikes. Billions of dollars depend on it. What we like is what we buy. In the sensory science department at the University of California at Davis, students participate in what's called sensory descriptive analysis panels, where they learn to measure sensations.
When we use humans as measuring devices, we have the problem. It's a good problem, but that they have brains, and they have memories, and they have diverse sensitivities. So in order to actually use a human being as a measuring device, you have to have groups of human beings.
The panelists, in this case a group of future winemakers, are presented with a selection of wines and asked to identify everything that they can smell and taste.
And I get some the hint of floral. and a lighter citrus fruit, probably orange.
After multiple tastings, the panel will finally agree on the terms that accurately identify the many components of the wine. The panel's analysis can be used to guide winemakers who are looking for a certain flavor profile. We often use the word flavor to describe how something tastes, but taste and flavor are not the same thing. Taste happens only in the mouth. Flavor is far more complex.
Flavor is a combination of smell, taste, texture. The crumbliness of the apple crisp in your mouth, the heat or the coolness, if it's a warm pie or a cold pie, all of those things are part of flavor.
So how does it all work? Let's start with taste and the chemical reaction that happens when a piece of food enters the mouth. Our tongue is covered with bumps called papillae. Inside these are the taste buds, and inside those are taste receptor cells. The receptor cells react to 5 basic tastes: sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and umami, or savory. These cells send their signals along nerve pathways to the brainstem, and from there, up into the brain.
There's a path through the thalamus into the so-called gustatory cortex. That's the part of the brain that's involved in sensing and perceiving taste.
Taste is our evolutionary survival mechanism. Bitter and sour helped us recognize and reject poisons. Sweet and salty meant nutritious carbohydrates. Smell is less important for survival, but it's essential for pleasure. About 95% of what we think is taste is actually smell.
If you take a jelly bean and taste it with your nose pinched, you will only have basic tastes that you will perceive. You will taste sourness and sweetness. You release your nose and all of a sudden all the aromas and the flavor of the jelly bean is there.
Millions of odor receptors send their signals along the olfactory nerve into the olfactory bulb.
The olfactory bulb, which is right up here, is enveloped by the emotional part of the brain. You have a very direct connection between when you smell it and it going into the brain. And so we respond to odors in a very visceral way. And especially odor memories we make as children are incredibly vivid, many years later.
Another part of the flavor equation is touch. This includes texture, temperature, and spice. A slippery oyster, a sizzling stew, a red-hot chili. Signals are sent along the trigeminal nerves responsible for sensations in the face. These 3 distinct nerve pathways, taste, smell, and touch, meet in the prefrontal cortex and the insula, where we identify flavor. But flavor perception is more complex than just knowing what we're eating. Do we like it? Does it trigger feelings or memories?
The gustatory pathway and smell pathways, they also have access to other parts of the brain, sort of older parts of the brain that are involved in emotions. There's linkages between different parts of the brain at every level.
As scientists decode how our senses work and how we perceive flavor, cooks are taking that knowledge, combining it with an understanding of food chemistry, and performing alchemy in the kitchen. Christopher Kostow is the chef at Meadowood, a Michelin-starred restaurant in the heart of Napa Valley. By artfully using food chemistry to blend traditional and unconventional ingredients, he creates dishes that arouse all the senses.
We don't begin with the science. We look at first what we want to do, as far as what textures we want to create, what contrasting temperatures, what flavors. I tell my cooks that we want to be evocative as opposed to provocative. So the science is a means by which to create memorable flavors and textures.
A perfect example is Kostow's molten Parmesan tortellini.
If you were to simply use Parmesan and use that to put in a tortellini, it'd be granular and oily and not very nice. So we need to figure out a way to make it liquid when warm, but not too liquid.
To achieve the desired effect, Kostow melts Parmesan and cream, then adds regular gelatin along with a thickener called Gelan gum. Gelan is a man-made bacteria that allows him to control the texture and firmness of the Parmesan center.
So this is going to go in the fridge.
The gelatin and gellan perform exactly as Kostow intended. Molten and creamy, a delectable explosion of Parmesan. Making our senses happy. It's all part of our quest for the sublime.
I think by playing on the edges of science and food production, chefs who are trying to experiment with how the senses work in their food make life much more interesting and quite magical.
Support for Quest is provided by the National Science Foundation, the S.D. Bechtel Jr. Foundation, Hope Lab, the David B. Gold Foundation, the Dirk and Charlene Kabsanel Foundation, the Vadez Family Foundation, the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, and the Smart Family Foundation. Support is also provided by the members of KQED. Quest is a project of KQED Science.
A KQED television production.